Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that might seem kind of basic at first, but trust me, it gets really interesting. We're talking drug absorption. What happens after you swallow that pill?
Yeah, it's definitely more complicated than it sounds. It's not just pop a pill and poof, you're cured.
Exactly. We're going to dig deep into the science of how drugs actually get from your stomach to where they need to go, all those twists and turns along the way.
Lots of twists and turns.
And our roadmap for this deep dive is a research excerpt. Biopharm56.pdf. It's pretty academic, but we're going to pull out the good stuff, the need-to-know nuggets, I promise. So to kick things off, let's define our terms. What exactly is drug absorption?
Well, simply put, it's the process of a drug molecule, traveling from where it enters your body, like if you swallow a pill, and getting into your bloodstream.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like a journey, a little road trip for the drug molecule.
Exactly. And that journey is super important if the drug needs to work throughout your whole body, like a pain reliever for a headache. But it's also important even for drugs that just work locally, like an antacid that's just targeting your stomach.
Ah, got it. So for a headache, the drug needs to get into the blood to reach your brain. But an antacid, it just stays put in the stomach.
Exactly.
But, and here's where it gets tricky, it's not as simple as the drug just dissolving in your stomach and magically appearing in your blood. I mean, there are barriers, right?
Oh, for sure. And the first big barrier any drug has to face is the cell membrane.
The cell membrane. Isn't that like every cell in your body has one of those?
Every single one. Think of it as the cell's security checkpoint. It's controlling what goes in and out, keeping things nice and balanced.
So it's not just a wall, it's like a really picky bouncer deciding who gets into the club.
Pretty much. And that bouncer has a couple of different ways to let molecules in.
Oh, okay, so what are the options? How does a drug molecule get past this cellular security?
So there are two main paths. We call them transcellular and paracellular transport.
Okay, so sound kind of complicated.
They're not so bad. Transcellular basically means going through the cell itself. Like imagine tunneling right through.
Oh, so some drugs are like little tunnel diggers.
In a way.
Yeah.
And then you have paracellular, which means squeezing between cells through these tiny little gaps we call tight junctions.
So some barge in, others sneak in. Makes sense. But the cell membrane itself, I mean, what's it even made of that makes it such a tough barrier?
Right, so the cell membrane is mostly made up of what we call a phospholipid bilayer. It's like a two-layered sandwich of fat molecules.
It's a fatty sandwich. Yum. But I'm guessing it's not edible.
Not quite. And sprinkled throughout the sandwich are these proteins that act like, receptors or channels or even transporters helping specific molecules get across.
So it's like a high-tech security gate with all sorts of sensors and checkpoints. Makes sense. Okay, so our drug molecule is now standing outside the cell, ready to get into the bloodstream. What's the most common way it makes that journey?
The most common way is through what's called passive diffusion.
Passive diffusion.
Yeah, it's kind of like, imagine you drop a dye tablet into a glass of water.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The color spreads out naturally, right? From where it's super concentrated to where there's less of it until it's all even.
Yeah, like it just diffuses through the water.
Exactly. And drug molecules do the same thing. They move from an area where there's a lot of them, like in your digestive system after you swallow a pill, to an area where there are less of them, like your bloodstream.
And they just do this naturally, no energy required.
That's right. No energy needed, just a natural flow from high concentration to low concentration.
The lazy river of drug absorption. Love it. But our source mentions this thing called Fick's Law. What's that about?
Fick's law is basically a way to describe the rate of that passive diffusion, put some math to it. It tells us how fast a drug will diffuse based on things like the surface area of the membrane.
So the bigger the surface area, the faster the absorption. Makes sense.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why the duodenum, that first part of the small intestine, is such a hot spot for absorption. It's got a huge surface area thanks to all these folds and little finger-like projections called villi and microvilli.
Ah, like a super absorbent sponge.
Exactly. It creates a huge surface area for absorption to happen. But here's the thing. Fick's law also factors in the drug's solubility in fat.
Fat.
Yeah, lipid solubility, we call it. The more easily a drug dissolves in fat, the easier it can slip through those fatty cell membranes.
Interesting. So it's not just about the size of the molecule, but what it's made of, too.
Right. And of course, the concentration gradient matters, too. The bigger the difference between the amount of drug in the gut and the amount in the blood, the faster it'll move.
Gotcha. So passive diffusion is the most common way for drugs to get absorbed, moving from high concentration to low. But but our source also says not all drugs are created equal. It starts talking about acids and bases and pH. Uh-oh, chemistry flashback. Why does that stuff matter for absorption?
Well, because it's not just about a drug dissolving, it's also about its chemical properties, and a lot of drugs are either weak acids or weak bases.
Okay, quick reminder. pH measures how acidic or basic something is. Low pH is acidic, high pH is basic. So how does this whole acid-base thing play into drug absorption?
It's all about ionization. So these weak acids and bases, they can exist in two forms, either ionized, meaning they carry an electrical charge, or non-ionized, meaning they don't have a charge.
Okay, two forms, got it.
And here's the key. The non-ionized form, it crosses cell membranes way easier, like it's got a VIP pass,
So non-ionized gets in easily, ionized gets stuck.
basically. Now here's where pH comes in. The pH of the environment, like the stomach or the blood, it determines how much of a weak acid or base is in each form.
Okay, I think I'm following. So a weak acid is going to be mostly non-ionized in an acidic environment, like the stomach.
Exactly. And that means it'll be absorbed better in the stomach. But in a more basic environment, like the blood, it'll be mostly ionized and have a harder time getting across membranes.
So pH can kind of trap a drug in certain places.
You got it. And that's where the pH partition hypothesis comes in. It says that a drug will tend to accumulate, build up where it's more ionized.
So like aspirin, that's a weak acid, right? It gets absorbed in the acidic stomach.
Exactly, because it's mostly non-ionized there. But then and gets trapped there.
Like a one-way door. Once it's in the blood, it's not going back to the stomach easily.
A perfect analogy. And this is why, when we talk about the gut, it's not just one big homogeneous tube. Different parts have different pH levels, and that makes a huge difference in how a drug gets absorbed.
Right. So let's break down the gut a little. We start with the mouth. Saliva maintenance with the drug.
But the mouth, not really a major site of absorption. Most drugs pass through pretty quickly.
Okay, so mouth, not so much. Then it's down the esophagus. Quick slide.
Again, not much absorption happening there. The esophagus is just a muscular tube, moving things along to the stomach.
So the real action starts in the stomach. Super acidic environment helps break down food.
And as we said, that acidic environment can be great for absorbing certain drugs, those weak acids. But the stomach isn't the absorption champion.
Oh, if not the stomach, then who?
That title goes to the duodenum.
The duodenum, our super absorbent sponge. We're back to that. But why is it so good at absorption?
It all comes back to that huge surface area we talked about. Plus, the duodenum has great blood flow, which helps maintain that concentration gradient, keep that flow of drug moving from the gut into the blood.
Okay, so the drug's happily dissolving in the duodenum, ready to be absorbed. But wait, the source mentions this thing called motility. Like, it's not just where the drug is, but how long it stays there. What is motility and why does it matter?
Think of it like the muscular contractions of your digestive system, those wave-like movements that push everything along.
Ah, so like it's not just a passive tube. Things are actually moving through it.
All right, it's a dynamic process. And that movement, that motility, it affects how long a drug hangs out in any given part of your gut.
So too much movement, like if you have diarrhea and the drug gets rushed through before it's all absorbed.
Exactly. Things like diarrhea can really speed up that transit time, and that can mean less drug gets absorbed. On the other hand, some conditions can actually slow down motility.
So the drug hangs out longer.
Yeah, and that could lead to more absorption, which could be good or bad depending on the drug.
Wow, so even just having diarrhea can affect how your meds work. That's crazy.
It really is. And it's not just your gut's natural rhythm that matters, but also what you eat.
Hold on, are you telling me that what I eat can mess with my medications?
Food can have a huge impact on how your meds work, yep.
So those instructions on the bottle, like take with food or take on an empty stomach, those actually matter.
Oh, absolutely. They're more than just suggestions. Some foods can actually increase the absorption of certain drugs.
Really? Like how does that work?
Well, take Gruzofolvin, for example. It's an antifungal medication.
Okay, Gruzofolvin.
And it's actually absorbed better when you take it with a fatty meal.
A fatty meal? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, it's because fat stimulates bile production. And bile, it helps break down fats, but it also helps absorb certain drugs.
So the fat helps the bile, which helps the drug get absorbed. It's like a chain reaction.
Exactly. But then you also have foods that can decrease absorption.
Oh, so food can be a helper or a hinderer in this whole absorption game.
It definitely plays both sides. A classic example is tetracycline. It's an antibiotic.
Okay, tetracycline.
And you shouldn't take it with calcium-rich foods like milk or cheese because the calcium can bind to the tetracycline, and that prevents it from getting absorbed properly.
So it's like the calcium grabs onto the drug and won't let go.
Pretty much. So yeah, those instructions on when and how to take your meds with food, definitely pay attention to those.
Okay, message received. Read the instructions, people. It can actually make a difference in how well your meds work. But, we've been talking about food and pH and motility, but there's got to be more to this absorption story. The body has to have some way of controlling what gets absorbed, right? Like some kind of internal security system.
You are so right. And the body does have a security system when it comes to absorption. And the key players are what we call transporters.
Transporters, what are those?
Think of them as specialized proteins embedded right in the cell membrane. And they act like bouncers at a club, deciding which molecules get in and which ones got to stay out.
So some transporters are like, come on in, the party's just getting started. And others are like, nope, not on the list, get out of here.
Exactly. And we call the welcoming ones uptake transporters, the ones that bring drugs in.
Okay, uptake, bringing them in.
And then you have efflux transporters. Those are the ones kicking drugs out.
Ah, so it's like a constant battle at the cell membrane, these transporters fighting over what gets in and what gets out.
Kind of like that. And these transporters are everywhere, not just in the gut. They're in the liver, the kidneys, even the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, wow, so they're controlling drug movement all over the body, not just in the gut.
Yep. Playing a huge role in how drugs get absorbed, distributed, and eliminated.
Okay, so these tiny little bouncers are controlling the fate of drugs at the cellular level. Amazing. Are there any specific transporters we should know about? The source mentions P-glycoprotein, or PGP. What's so special about that one?
PGP, that's a famous one. It's an efflux transporter, one of the bouncers kicking drugs out.
Okay, so not one of the friendly ones.
Not exactly. It's actually really important for protecting us. Like, it's found in high amounts in the intestines, the liver, the kidneys, the blood-brain barrier.
Hey, the blood-brain barrier, what's that?
It's this super tight barrier of cells that protects the brain from harmful substances. And PGP is right there, like the head bouncer, making sure nothing gets in that shouldn't.
This is like the brain's personal bodyguard.
Pretty much. Keeps those unwanted substances out. But here's the thing. Sometimes we want a drug to get into the brain or into other places where PGP is working hard to keep things out.
I can see how that would be a problem. So how do scientists get around this super bouncer?
Well, there are a few strategies. Sometimes you can design drugs that aren't recognized by PGP. They can kind of slip past unnoticed.
Like wearing a disguise to get into the club?
Exactly. Or you can give another drug that actually inhibits PGP, basically distracting the bouncer so the drug we want can sneak in.
Clever. So it's like a pharmaceutical Trojan horse. But this raises a big question. If PGP is so good at blocking drugs, does that mean everyone absorbs drugs differently? Like, what if your PGP is extra strong?
That's a great point. And you're right, PGP activity can vary from person to person, often because of genetic differences. So yeah, that means the same drug can have different effects in different people.
Wow, so it's not just about the drug itself, it's about your own individual biology too. That's personalized medicine, right?
Exactly. And the source actually gives a great example, digoxin.
Digoxin.
It's a heart medication. And some people naturally have higher PGP activity, so they absorb less digoxin. But other people, they have this specific gene variant that makes their PGP less active, so they absorb more digoxin.
Oh, so that means they could be at risk for side effects if they get too much of the drug.
Exactly. Knowing someone's PGP status could help doctors figure out the right dose of digoxin, personalize their treatment.
Amazing. So genetics can really play a big role in drug absorption. But it's not just genes that can affect PGP, right? The source also mentions that diseases can throw a wrench in the whole absorption process.
It's true. Disease can really shake things up. It makes sense. Your body's systems are all connected, so if one thing's off, it can affect everything else.
So how does having a disease mess with drug absorption?
It can happen in lots of ways. For example, Crohn's disease. It affects the digestive tract.
Okay, Crohn's disease.
And it can change the blood flow to the gut, the pH, the motility. All things we've talked about that can impact how drugs get absorbed.
Ah, Right. It's all connected.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And then you have things like congestive heart failure, which can reduce blood flow to the gut, too.
So less blood flow means slower absorption.
Right. So yeah, if you have a chronic illness, your doctor really needs to consider all these factors when prescribing medications. It's a balancing act, for sure.
Wow. So much to consider. But wait, there's another layer of complexity here, right? We've got to talk about drug interactions. Like, it's not just food that can interfere with how your meds work. Other meds can too, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Drugs can interact with each other in all sorts of ways, some good, some bad. It's like a big party in your body, and sometimes the guests don't get along so well.
So sometimes drugs can boost each other's absorption, and sometimes they can block it.
Exactly. One common way drugs interact is by competing for those transporter proteins we were talking about.
Ah, right, the bouncers. So if two drugs want to use the same transporter,
Then one might hog it all up, leaving the other drug stranded.
so one drug gets a free ride, the other gets left behind.
Exactly. Or one drug could actually block the transporter completely so the other drug can't get in at all.
Well, that sounds dangerous. What about that grapefruit juice thing? I've always heard you shouldn't drink grapefruit juice with certain meds. Why is that?
Grapefruit juice is a classic example. It's got these compounds that inhibit, block both PGP
Super bouncer.
and an important enzyme called CYP3A4.
CYP what now?
It's an enzyme that helps break down, metabolize a lot of different drugs.
Okay, so grapefruit juice messes with both transporters and how the body breaks down drugs.
It's a double whammy.
Ah.
And that means that some drugs, when you take them with grapefruit juice, they stay in your system longer at higher levels.
So that could be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess, depending on the drug.
Exactly. But most of the time, it's not a good thing. It can increase the risk of side effects. So yeah, that grapefruit juice warning, definitely pay attention to that one. But wait, you mentioned something interesting. You asked if grapefruit juice could ever be a good thing when it comes to drug interactions. It can, actually. Sometimes doctors will intentionally combine drugs to boost absorption or to reduce side effects, take advantage of how they interact. It's all about knowing the specifics.
Ah, so it's not always a bad thing, but definitely something to be aware of. Always tell your doctor about all the medications and supplements you're taking, even that innocent glass of grapefruit juice.
Absolutely. They need the full picture to make the best decisions about your treatment.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've seen that drug absorption is this wild, complex journey with so many twists and turns.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as just swallowing a pill. What are some of the key takeaways from our deep dive into drug absorption?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that it's not just pop a pill and you're done. It's a whole process, and there are so many things that can affect how much drug actually gets to where it needs to go.
Right. It's like we busted that myth wide open.
Yeah, totally. And we've seen how the cell membrane is this major gatekeeper, with drugs having to find sneaky ways to get across, whether it's squeezing between cells or hitching a ride on those transporters.
And we can't forget about pH, how the acidity or alkalinity of different parts of the digestive system can totally change how well a drug gets absorbed.
Absolutely. And then there's food. It can be a friend or a foe, depending on the drug and what you eat.
Right. And then those transporter proteins, the bouncers of the cell, they're controlling who gets in and who gets out. And that can be influenced by genetics, diseases, all sorts of things.
Exactly. It highlights how important personalized medicine is becoming.
And then, just to add another layer of complexity, there are those drug interactions where different meds can either work together or clash. And that can really throw a wrench in the absorption process.
So many factors at play.
It's mind-blowing. So I think the main message here is that drug absorption is this incredibly delicate, intricate dance.
A delicate dance. I love that. And understanding this dance is super important both for healthcare providers and for patients.
Absolutely. It helps us make better decisions about our health and how to get the most out of our medications.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of drug absorption, I have a thought for you to chew on. What if we could personalize not just the drug itself, but the delivery system too? Like, tailor it to each person's unique biology, their genes, their lifestyle, everything. Could that be the future of medicine? It's something to ponder. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.